All right, very quickly, here's my 2 cents in this whole Stanford rape controversy thing, which I think is a case. And basically, the case is that this 17-year-old kid who's a swimmer in the Stanford swim team uh, met this woman who's apparently a graduate who had come back to a party with her younger sister, gotten drunk, passed out, and woke up to find that she'd been raped. This guy was caught, the 17-year-old kid was caught on top of her by two people riding by on bicycles when he was apparently inserting himself or some part of himself into her behind a dumpster. And the case went to trial. The guy was originally charged with 5 different counts, such as rape of an intoxicated person, rape of an unconscious person, all these different varieties of rape, which they feel need to have a special law against them, because apparently it's not enough to say that they raped them. We have to say they were unconscious also or intoxicated also, and make that a separate charge for some reason. So what happened was the guy pled not guilty. The case went to trial. The guy was found guilty of 3 counts, and at the sentencing phase, his father sent in a letter, and other people sent in a letter that knew him, and I don't know if he made a statement or not, and the victim made a statement, and all this kind of stuff. And the judge in the case sentenced the guy to 6 months, plus put him on the sex offenders list, and he was kicked out of school. And everyone's screaming that the judge was way too lenient because he didn't get 20 years, or I think the most he was looking at was 14 years for all the charges. And there's this huge change org petition and all this kind of stuff to get this guy thrown off the bench. And apparently some people are convinced that neither the father or other people actually understand the gravity of the situation, because they're all concerned about what happened with the kid. And the judge, in their minds, underestimated or doesn't quite understand the gravity of what happened with the victim, and also doesn't understand the gravity of the sentence. Only sentencing to somebody to 6 years or 6 months for a rape. And then the sister making this statement, how it wasn't like he kidnapped her off the street and dragged her into the bushes and raped her. No, they met at a party. And this is really just a case of bad decisions on both parts. It shouldn't be equated to something like a guy who kidnapped a woman and raped her. And the father saying, he shouldn't have his life ruined over 20 minutes of bad actions. And then people are screaming about this. Oh, this is shallow, white, elitist, athlete, college male behavior at its worst, and this is the kind of stuff that should most definitely be given a sentence to make a statement to the public and all this kind of stuff. And then it turns out also that the judge is a Stanford athlete also, which just doesn't really look good in this case. And I'm just going to basically come out and say, look, the kid was drunk too. He was 17 years old. The girl was drunk. She's in her 20s. She's a college graduate. Okay. She forgot what drinking was like and has gotten to the point where she said, in her own words, her tolerance is not as good as it was before. But she decided to go to this party anyway with her sister anyway, get wasted, pass out. I'm sure she didn't do it on purpose. Nobody ever wants to get drunk to the point where they pass out. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. And then this happened to her. And then she's talking about how she feels as a result. I said, look, we have complete sympathy for what happened to you. I think there's no question about it. I do anyway. And I understand that, the drinking culture on campus, having gone through that myself, the drinking culture on campus can lead to some very bad results, unfortunate results, depending how you look at it. And I think that some people are maybe a little bit jaded about that, and there's no question about that. And sure, there's some people who exploit that. There's no question about that either. There's some people who exploit rape, in the situation. There's no question about that. But still, the kid was 17 years old when this happened, and he had also been drinking himself. Yes, it was his choice to drink at 17. Yes, just as it was this girl's choice to get drunk, okay? To go to this party and drink. Yes, with her sister. Yes, no question about it. But people do this all the time. If you're going to criticize what happened in the situation, you have to accept that people do this all the time, despite this possibility. Guys are horn dogs at these parties. Girls are horn dogs at these parties. I'm not saying that this girl wanted to have sex with him or was trying to have sex with him and things got out of control. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, why do you want to give this girl so much respect despite the fact that she was drunk and had gotten passed out? Maybe she was doped. Who knows? Who knows what really happened? But let's just say this. She went to the party. She had been through all this stuff in school, went to this party, got drunk and passed out. Look at that. I'm not saying it makes her guilty or complicit, but I am saying, look what she did, okay? The kid did something very similar to that, okay? If she's not responsible for what happened to her, despite the fact that she consciously decided to drink alcohol at this party, okay? How are you going to hold the kid responsible for this when he's 17 and drinking? How are you going to do it? How does it make sense? And I think this is where so many of these cases come into the courts, and women want all this sentences and all these laws which have been passed by the legislature specifically to appease women for this reason and reasons like this and so on. But they don't want to see that if both sides have been drinking, that both sides are not really in control of their actions. And that is the situation here. It's very simple. It's very simple. No matter what people say about what the kid did, he's still 17 and he still was drinking. He still was under the influence of alcohol. He's still a first-time offender, and he's still going to get a felony record, and he's still going to be registered as a sex offender. So if the issue is that he didn't get sentenced to 20 years in jail, well, first of all, he wasn't even up for 20 years in jail because the most that he could have gotten was 14 years. So 6 months to 14 years. Now your issue is, why wasn't he sentenced to, 5 years in jail for raping her? I don't think that 5 years in jail for raping is a really tough sentence either. 6 months, yeah, it's kind of crazy, but still, he's first offender, and still, he was 17, and still, he had been drinking too. And still, you have to realize that he would probably not have done this if he wasn't drinking, if he wasn't drunk. And still, a lot of people in this country commit offenses, serious offenses, violent offenses, under the influence of alcohol and when they're young and following all kinds of stupid things going on around them all the time. And I am sure that everyone regrets the situation, for different reasons at different levels, but you can't dismiss that fact. You can't dismiss the fact that he's 17, it's his first offense, he had a clean record, and he was drinking, okay? Someone needs to stand up and face that fact, and that's the real issue here. Who among the 300,000 people who want to see this judge removed is going to stand up and face that fact? I think this judge did a brave thing. He didn't throw the kid in jail for 10 years, which some people wanted, and I think that was a good decision. I mean, how is that going to really help the kid to go to a state penitentiary for 10 years at 17? How is it really going to help him? And what is the point of wanting a sentence like that in this case? Okay? Yes, it would have gotten him off the streets, and people are arguing, oh, he's a rapist, it'll get him off the streets, blah, blah, blah. Again, you're applying that logic to someone with a clean record who's 17, who has no history of violent offense at all. Where is your argument coming from? Okay? If it's coming from the fact that you think this kid needs to be removed from society, why do you send your kids to college? Why do you go to college? You know this kind of thing happens at college. You cannot argue that you don't know this kind of thing happens at college. Anyway, so the point is that the kid was 17. He had been drinking. He had a clean record, no history of violent offenses anywhere in his record, and he had been drinking. And it's really kind of a shame when you see people pushing for these huge sentences in this case, knowing that, okay, when it just doesn't make any sense to have that happen. Removing this one kid from society for X number of years and putting him in a state or federal penitentiary, is that really called for in this situation? Seriously. You know that this kind of thing happens at college campuses across the country several times a year, spring break several times a year. I'm not saying that rape necessarily happens, although it does, okay? But you know that parties happen whenever there's a chance for a party, whenever people can get alcohol, whenever girls can be found to go to these parties. Guys will have parties to bring these girls and get them drunk with the intent of having sex. There's no question about it. So why do you argue that the solution here is to get this one guy off the street for 20 years when this thing happens all the time? A bacchanalia happens all the time at college campuses across the country. So what's your argument? There is no reasonable argument for doing this that doesn't ignore the fact that he was drunk too, and that parties like this happen all the time. And the real problem is that parties like this happen all the time where women are victimized all the time. It just seems to me that women are fucking guys in court and then trying to act like because it happens in court, it's just, and because we did this in a courtroom, it's legal and it's right and it's ethical. I said, no, I don't think fucking people in a courtroom is legal or just and ethical. You're still fucking them. This kid did something which was bad, but no matter what we say, we have to remember he was drunk when he did it. We have to remember he was 17 when he did it. We have to remember that he had a clean record. He had no history of violent offenses. He had basically been a good kid before this, as far as we know. There's no one here saying that this guy had a history of predating on women or harassing women at parties or harassing women on the campus or harassing women in high school or violence against anyone. There's no evidence that he had a history of this kind of behavior before this happened. Why do you want to hang the kid for getting drunk at a party and having sex with an unconscious girl? Why do you want to hang him for it? Okay, why do you want to put him in jail for 10 years for this? Okay, he was drunk too. If you're gonna excuse people who are victims despite the fact that they're drunk, and I'm not blaming the victim here, I'm not trying to say that she's responsible for it. I'm just saying if you're going to give them, oh, she was drunk, so it was wrong for you to have sex with her regardless. She could not have consciously given consent to it. Why don't you do the same thing for the guys? Okay? Why don't you do the same thing for the guys? Why don't you realize that these guys are drunk too? Yeah, some of them are drinking to excuse their behavior because they have an excuse for it. Yes, but people who say, oh, alcohol does not excuse the fact that you raped her. No, it doesn't excuse it. Okay? But at the same time, they're not fully responsible for their actions either. And you have to accept that. You have to realize that you can't drink alcohol and be completely in control of your actions. That's a reality. And that's I think what people are trying to just ignore here. They're trying to just blow over that point. Now, I personally think that there was an argument for dismissing all of the charges in this case. And I certainly think that this kid could have negotiated some kind of reasonable resolution to this case with this girl if he had been sensible. But on the other hand, okay, they decided to take the chance in court, and this is what happened. And you have to realize that it could have not happened. The judge could have dismissed the charges, okay? He could have been found innocent for this very reason, that he was drunk when it happened, okay? He was found guilty, which is questionable. The judge could have thrown out the decisions based upon a lack of evidence or extenuating circumstances. He didn't do that. And I think at that point, what he did after that was probably harsh compared to what really should have happened. If I had been the judge in this case, I would have very strongly felt that this case should have been thrown out. And I do have to say, for the simple reason he was 17 years old and he was drunk. No other reason than that. Okay, I'm not going to say that it was excusable in any way, but at the same time, to hold him responsible for it is a bit too far. And he's getting railroaded, in my opinion, to a certain degree. But the basic issue is to say that he should go to jail for 20 years is bullshit, and it just doesn't make sense. And I'm not saying that I think it's right as a judgment, but it is what the judge decided. And it does seem in this case that when women don't get the decision they want to have, they go for the jugular. Okay, look, the guy's a sitting judge. If you're going to go for the jugular in anything in this case, you should go for the jugular because he was a Stanford athlete. But the problem is a lot of judges are college athletes. A lot of judges went to college, and you're always going to have some degree of conflict of interest in these sort of cases. It's that this is one of those situations where you have to say you're really nitpicking here, and I don't think there's really a huge argument for it, except for the fact that he was a Stanford graduate and an athlete at Stanford. That is the only reason I think that this judge's decision is questionable. But by the same token, you got to remember this. Trust me. Okay, if the case is decision is voided on appeal and the case goes back to court, same thing could happen just as easily, you know. And there's also a good chance that it will not be sent back for retrial because the appellate court will say, we don't see any reason to have the case tried again. Yeah, the guy maybe should have recused himself from the trial, but we don't think that the decision would have been a lot different. They're not going to throw out this decision or throw out the sentence if they don't think that a normal, more, let's say, the ideal, non-biased or judge wouldn't have done something substantially different. If they think that they would have done pretty much the same thing, they'll let it stand. All right, so this brings up another point, which some people have already said, maybe why you shouldn't do this. I'm sure there's many reasons why this shouldn't be done, which I've already said, and I'm sure there's some reasons that people have thought of that I haven't thought of, and I don't know if I'm going to get into that. I'm just going to say, look, you might get the judge thrown off the bench, out of public outrage, okay? What matters is the legal decisions, because other judges are going to see this as a precedent, as a legal decision, and they will follow this precedent, okay? The real concern is the legal case here, because it doesn't matter who a judge is, they're always going to take a valid case seriously and use that as a guideline in adjudicating the case. And if the appeals court does not throw this out and demand a retrial, what are you going to say at that point? That if a judge doesn't ignore the lack of action at the appellate level, that they still have to basically sentence a rapist to 20 years in prison regardless of circumstances, or the public is going to groundswell and get him thrown off the bench? A lot of judges are going to say, fine, throw me off the bench if that's what you want to do. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to lynch this kid because 50 million people in this country think that he should get 20 years in jail. It's not, that's part of what being a judge is about, is having the backbone to make these unpopular decisions. There's a certain amount of give and take, certain amount of the victim gets this and the plaintiff gets that. I'm sure there's someone's going to say in an ideal case, both sides lose to a certain point. Okay, and I certainly agree that the kid, declared himself to be innocent, said he's not guilty, took the case to trial, and basically raised the ante at that point. And you have to wonder what would have happened if he had declared, if he had agreed, if he had pled guilty to the to the charges. What would have happened then? And the real question is, would it have been even less of a punishment? Would he have gotten 3 months or 180 days suspended or something like that? Is there some kind of procedure or policy where you can have these decisions vacated, this taken off his record, or is this something he can't have taken off his record? If he has to register for the sex offender list, but he can have the felony conviction taken off his record. like 2 or 3 years from now, because a lot of times that does happen, that even though somebody loses a case in trial, they still can have the decision removed from their record, expunged, one through one means or another. And a very good lawyer will certainly be aware of these options. And he may have decided he had nothing to lose, really. And he went ahead and said, okay, I'll plead innocent. And the worst comes to worst, I'll register for the sex offender list, but probably this will become a non-issue. And these are all kinds of issues that are legal issues. But the real issue here again is, this is what happened, and your response is not to challenge it on a legal basis. Your response is to attack the judge directly on an ethical basis. He's a sitting judge. You don't attack judges on an ethical basis lightly, okay? You undermine the entire system simply because it didn't do what you wanted it to do. That is not good politics.